Hey everybody, this is Matt Worden. I'm the designer of Days of Discovery, the first game in the Tales of Danger series. And this is going to be a quick video walkthrough of how to play the game. Before we get into the actual gameplay, I just want to run down some information from the cards. These top 6 cards here are the sponsor cards. They're going to be the people that you are trying to get in Act 1 to sponsor your voyage. Each one has a few pieces of information. Number in the lower left is going to be the rank. The king is ranked 1, queen 2, all the way down to the Knight Templar being the 6th ranked sponsor. That will come in handy at the end of the game in case, and is used as a tiebreaker. Each sponsor has their own icon showing in the upper right corner, and that I'll show you on the other cards how that comes into play. Each one in Act 1 is going to require a certain amount of evidence, which are represented by scrolls, and plans represented by maps, in order for you to secure them as your sponsor. As you go down the ranks, you'll notice that they need less and less information in the form of evidence and plans to be secured. So it takes longer, or usually better cards, to get the higher ranked sponsors. In Act 2, the information in the bottom right corner is used. The start number is how many cards from your original hand coming out of Act 1 will be kept. The market is going to be how many cards you can draft during Act 2, and the max is the size of your hand during Act 2. As for the other 102 cards in the deck, they are all people cards that look like this. Each one will have a picture and a title to represent what kind of character they are, but then they all have similar information in the same spots. Down the red ribbon will be which sponsors they're able to talk to. So in this case, this captain can talk to our Merchant Guild, has the scales, and also our noble matriarch, which has the chalice. If we go to, for example, the farmer, she's able to talk to the king and to the Merchant Guild and to the Knights Templar. So that's important as you're building your hand in Act 1. Only the cards that can speak to a specific sponsor can provide their evidence and plans to that sponsor. So you will be attempting to gather cards that have similar symbols here so that they can collect what's needed up here to secure that sponsor. In Act 2, all of the information that matters is in the bottom half of the cards. It's going to be everything in this market area. You will be trying to collect supplies, which would be the barrels, or crew, which are the sailors, and in some cases, some characters give you some special actions, which I'll explain during our Act 2 and Act 3 part of this video. Finally, the last piece of information is on the right edge of the cards. These are broken into 2 parts. One is the ship with the number, and then there's some kind of a traveling cost that is used in Act 3. When we get to Act 3, we'll explain how you build your segments, but basically this number explains how difficult the segment's going to be, and then randomly from the rest of the deck, these costs get put down on top for you to pay for each segment. Setup is pretty straightforward. You set out the sponsors so all players can see them, especially so they can see this information along the right edge of each card. You shuffle the 102 people cards, put the first top 5 up as a pool that will be drawn from or drafted from, and then each player will start with a reference card and 3 cards to start in their hand. The objective of Act 1 is to secure a sponsor. You are trying to get a handful of cards of people who can speak to one of these sponsors and provide the evidence and plans that they're looking for. So you usually start by looking for who can all of my people talk to. One thing I notice off the top of the bat with these people is they all have the rose, which stands for the queen. And between the 3 of them, I have 1, 2 plans and 2 evidence. And the queen needs 4 evidence and 6 plans. So my plans during Act 1 will involve trying to draft people who can also talk to the queen in order to secure her as our sponsor. On your turn, you're going to do these steps in order. You're going to recruit 2 people from the pool or the deck. You have a maximum hand size of 7 during Act 1, and then you'll refill the pool. There will always be 2 people missing from the pool, and I'll explain that in a moment. And then you check to see if you can secure a sponsor. And if you can, you call it out, and then we transition to Act 2. I'll explain that. The way that drafting works is you can either take any one of the cards from the pool for either of the 2 cards that you're allowed to draft. So what I know is I'm looking for people that can talk to the queen, and I've got 2 more right here. So you can either take one from here, or you can take the top card from the deck. Let me look out. We have so many sailors coming to our help. But when you take from the top card of the deck, then you need to discard one from the pool. So there will always be 2 cards missing from the pool. When you're done, discard pile goes to the side, and then we refill the pool. I cannot at this point claim the queen yet, or any other sponsor, so we'll just go to the next player's turn and go from there. After a few turns here in Act 1, I am at my 7 card limit, and right now I do have everybody can talk to the queen. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 plans, and 1, 2, 3 evidence. She needs 4 evidence and 6 plans, so I just need to pick up 1 more evidence. When I scan through who I have out here, I do see I have 1 person who can help me here, and that would be the innkeeper. So I'm going to draft her. Remember, I'll need to get rid of somebody here. And do I want any of these other people? I don't think so at the moment, so I'm just going to take from the top. And he's not going to help me at all. But I'm going to see what is the person next to me after. For example, if they were aiming for the king, or so it looked, I would probably want to discard this one just to get that out of the pool. And then when I get down to 7 cards here, let me get rid of the merchant because he's not helpful. I'm going to get rid of our one of our sailors, and then I have my 7 cards left, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4 evidence and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 plans, and I say I'm able to claim the queen. Players move immediately into Act 2 once they have what they need to get a sponsor, and the transition steps are to take the sponsor card. That card does not count as part of your hand, it's just there for reference for you, and to reduce your hand down to start. So in the queen's case, I get to start with 3, and what I'm after in Act 2 is crew and supplies, so I'm going to get rid of anything that has a very limited amount of things, and I think I'm going to keep this doctor who can cancel illness, which we'll explain in a minute, and then I will keep these 2 who each give me a crew and a supply, and I'll explain that a little bit here in Act 2, what we're after. We're going to get down the weeds a little bit here, but I just want to touch on something called the move the story along rule. It happens at the end of Act 1 when there's only 1 player remaining who does not yet have a sponsor. If that's you, and it's your next turn, you do have that last turn yet to try to gain one of the sponsors yourself. So if you've been trying to get that king or that merchant guild, you still have 1 more turn to draft and assemble the group of people who could get them. If you cannot on that turn, then you automatically get the lowest ranking sponsor that has yet to be claimed. As mentioned before, every player individually moves into Act 2 as soon as they get their sponsor. So once you have your sponsor, your next turn will be in Act 2. Your goal during Act 2 is to gather crew and supplies that you'll be using on your voyage during Act 3. And the steps are similar to Act 1, but there's one extra thing that's interesting, and that is some of the cards have a marking at the bottom that says free for, And if you have a card that says free for your sponsor, in this case we have the Queen, and this Queen's Confessor is free for the Queen, you just get that card before anything happens on your turn. You take that card and you immediately refill it from the top of the deck. If that next card says free for the Queen, you get that card as well. Basically, you go until there's no more free for Queen cards out, and you have your 5 cards to draft from. In the Queen's case, the market value is 3, which means on your turn you can draft 3 cards. And again, you can either pick cards from the pool, like I will take these 2. I'm going to be taking this Merchant, who's going to have a cancel action, which I'm still going to get to here in Act 3, and this Farmer who gives me a lot of barrels. I like that. The ratio of sailors to barrels that usually show up across all, if you measure all voyage segments in Act 3, it's about 1 sailor per 2 barrels. But of course, because it's coming from the deck of cards, it could be any combination. Once you've drafted your 3, and I've only drafted 2, so I'm going to take 1 from the top of the deck. Ooh, another Farmer. That's good. And I'm going to get rid of one of the cards from the pool. Then you refill the pool, and you check your hand size. In this case, the Queen allows me to keep 10 cards in my hand, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we'll get a few more turns in before we're going to need to start dumping cards back down to 10. I'm at a point now in my Act 2 where I have all 10 cards that the Queen allows me to keep in my hand. You'll notice in Act 1 and Act 2, the hand has been kept face up on the table. That is how the game is played in multiplayer. For Acts 1 and Act 2, you keep your cards face up, mainly to keep an eye on what everybody else is doing during Act 1, but in Act 2, just to see where everybody is as far as getting close to their max hand size. Once all players are in Act 2 and at their max hand size, then we will transition as a group into Act 3. At the start of Act 3, all of the cards that are not in play, so the pool, the discard, and the deck are all shuffled back into one deck, and each player picks up their hand into a private hand at this point. The backside of the reference card is our tableau that I mentioned at the very beginning of the game, and your sponsor is really just there as a reference for later, because if there's a tie score at the end of the game, the people who are tied, the ranking of their sponsor is the tiebreaker. The first thing we do with Act 3 is we prepare a segment. You start by either playing a card out of your hand or taking the top one from the deck. Normally you'd play out of your hand if you've got plenty of cards, because you can control this number. All that matters on this card is this ship. The number on the ship is the difficulty of this segment, and it's going to be the points you score at the end of the game by completing this segment. When you put the segment card down, nothing else on the card matters. The number here tells you how many cards from the top of the deck to draw to be your cost for this segment. So you just draw, in this case, 3 cards, and they go on top. I like to cover up everything else on that lower card because none of it matters other than that ship. And what I'm really looking at on these 3 cards, and it's funny that they came up to be the same thing, is this box here. So what this is in order to complete this segment, I need to lose 6 barrels from my supply. And the supply is the cards I have in my hand. So from my hand, I will be playing out 6 barrels. And one thing that's very interesting that happened as I was drafting my hand is I ended up with 2 of these farmers. And the farmers each supply 3 barrels from the market. So if I play both of them, that's 6 barrels, and that pays for this. So I can take them, I discard my payments, I discard my costs, and this card is the first card on my completed segments part of my tableau. The next thing I do is I play a card face down as my journal for this segment. Basically, how well did I write about the journey I just took? And what I'm looking for is a high-scoring ship of that isn't going to be too much supplies that are leaving. There is a 3, and it's a single sailor and a single barrel. So I'm going to hide that 3 in my journal, and I know at this point I have 6 points that'll be scored at the end of the game. As soon as I am done with a segment, as long as I have less than 5, I set up the next segment, and it works the same as what I showed before. You play a card out of your hand, or take the card from the top of the deck as your next segment difficulty card, and then based on that number, you draw the next cards, in this case 2 of them, as your costs. This is a pretty costly segment. It would be 4 sailors and 2 barrels. Sailors are the more rare of the resources, and so that's a lot of sailors to lose on a 2-point segment. This is where the cards come in handy that can cancel things. So I happen to have a doctor and a merchant. The doctor is able to cancel illness, and the merchant's able to cancel rough seas. So in this case, it doesn't matter even what the costs are, and I can play the doctor to cancel this illness card. The merchant will cancel that rough seas card, and that essentially takes away both of my cost cards, and I've completed this segment. So at this point I'm working on my 4th segment of the voyage here in Act 3, and it's a pretty rough segment. I am scheduled here to lose 5 sailors and 4 supplies, and right now in my hand all I have is 2 sailors and 2 supplies. So the thing the game allows you to do is a thing called forage. This is going to take up your turn, and it's going to actually add another card to your costs, but it adds cards into your hand. And the way you forage is you flip over the top 4 cards, and you look them over. And one of them you choose to go as an extra cost on your segment, and the other go into your hand. So right now I have 2 and 2. I need 5 and 4. If I look at the costs, I could probably add one of these that adds a single barrel or a single sailor. But what I noticed over here is a cost type of great fishing. That is a special cost type that isn't even a cost. Basically, as soon as you pay all the rest of the costs, it means fishing was so good you gain extra things. So what this does is let you draw 1 extra new card from the deck into your hand when you're done paying for this segment. So once I'm able to bring these cards into my hand, I'll have to wait till my next turn comes around, but then I'll be able to pay off these costs, get a card from the deck into my hand for great fishing, and then I'll be done with my 4th segment. The end of the game is triggered when a player completes their 5th segment. As soon as that player completes their 5th segment, they are done, and each of the other players get 1 more turn to try to complete whatever segment they have in front of them. And then, once everybody else has had that last final turn, we score. And as I was saying at the very start of the video, you flip over these journal cards, and you're going to add up all of the journal cards and segment cards for your final score. So in this case, it would be 5, 9, 11, 14, 15, 21, 24, which is actually a fairly high score. Most of the scores end up in the high teens to mid-20s. If you have a tie, then the rank of your sponsor is the tiebreaker.